hate these ball shows. I'm over the wheel of torture.
Dinner is served.
Everybody dig in.
Don't mind if I do, Lillian.
It's easy to see where Fiona gets her good looks from.
When Shrek 2 arrived in theaters, it carried the rare distinction of being a sequel to a cultural phenomenon that had genuinely reshaped animated filmmaking. The first film had dismantled fairy tale conventions with gleeful irreverence, blending pop culture satire with an unexpectedly sincere emotional core. The challenge for the follow-up was not merely to replicate that success, but to expand the world in a way that felt organic, escalate the emotional stakes, and sharpen the humor without losing the heart that made audiences care in the first place. What emerged was not simply a continuation, but a confident evolution, bigger in scope, sharper in satire, and surprisingly resonant in its themes of identity, acceptance, and the pressure to conform. At the center of the film once again is the unlikely trio whose chemistry defined the original adventure. Mike Myers returns as the gruff yet vulnerable ogre, imbuing Shrek with that distinctive Scottish-tinged cadence that makes every sarcastic aside land with extra bite. Eddie Murphy reprises his role as Donkey, whose hyperactive loyalty and unstoppable commentary inject kinetic energy into nearly every scene. And Cameron Diaz continues to shape Princess Fiona into something far more complex than a typical fairy tale heroine. Under the direction of Andrew Adamson and Kelly Asbury, the sequel demonstrates a clear understanding of what worked before while boldly enlarging the canvas. The premise is elegantly simple but dramatically loaded. Fiona's parents, rulers of the kingdom of Far, Far Away, invite their daughter and her new husband to a celebratory dinner, blissfully unaware that both bride and groom are ogres. This setup alone creates an immediate tension rooted not in physical danger, but in social expectation. The humor arises from culture shock, the collision between swamp-born authenticity and polished royal decorum. But beneath the laughs lies a universal anxiety, the fear of not being accepted by your partner's family, of not measuring up to their imagined ideal. The journey to Far, Far Away becomes an opportunity to explore the expanding fairy tale universe. Visually, the film moves beyond the earthy textures of the swamp into a dazzling parody of Hollywood glamour and aristocratic opulence. The kingdom itself feels like a mashup of storybook Europe and modern celebrity culture, complete with red carpet fanfare and tongue-in-cheek references that wink at contemporary audiences. The animators push the technical boundaries further than the first installment, with richer lighting, more detailed environments, and expressive character animation that amplifies both slapstick and subtle emotion. Upon arrival, the central conflict crystallizes through the reaction of Fiona's parents. The king's thinly veiled horror and the queen's strained politeness form the emotional backbone of the narrative. The father-in-law dynamic becomes particularly crucial. What begins as comic discomfort evolves into something sharper and more personal, a clash between expectation and reality. The king had envisioned a handsome prince rescuing his daughter, fulfilling a fairy tale prophecy. Instead, he is confronted with an ogre whose very existence challenges the myth he believed in. The film uses this friction not just for gags, but to interrogate the rigidity of traditional happy ever after formulas. Complicating matters further is the introduction of a suave, self-assured rival who embodies that conventional fairy tale ideal. This character operates both as romantic competitor and thematic foil. Where Shrek is blunt, earthy, and emotionally transparent, the rival is polished, image-conscious, and meticulously curated. The tension between them becomes less about physical confrontation and more about self-worth. Shrek's insecurities intensify as he wonders whether Fiona might be happier with someone who fits the royal mold. This psychological dimension elevates the sequel beyond simple farce, revealing an undercurrent of vulnerability that gives weight to the spectacle. Parallel to this is the unforgettable arrival of a new ally, an agile, charismatic feline mercenary whose introduction is staged with swashbuckling flair. The character's theatrical bravado, only to be hilariously undercut by disarming cuteness, adds a fresh dynamic to the ensemble. His presence shifts the group's rhythm, creating new comedic triangulations while also expanding the mythic scope of the world. The sequel understands that a successful expansion is not merely about scale, but about character interplay. Thematically, the film doubles down on its predecessor's core message. True love is not about superficial transformation, but radical acceptance. However, it complicates that message by introducing the temptation of magical alteration. A potion promising beauty and acceptance dangles before Shrek as a potential solution to his insecurity. The notion that he could temporarily become the handsome version of himself he believes Fiona deserves speaks directly to societal pressures, how external validation can seduce even the most self-aware individuals. The ensuing transformation sequence is not just a visual set piece, it becomes a narrative experiment in alternate identity.
What makes this arc compelling is that it resists easy cynicism. The film does not mock the desire to be accepted. Instead, it acknowledges how deeply human that desire is. Shrek's decision to drink the potion stems from love, albeit misguided. He is willing to reshape himself if it means sparing Fiona embarrassment. In doing so, the story explores a mature tension. How much should one change for a relationship, and at what point does self-alteration become self-erasure? Comedically, the sequel sharpens its satire of fairy tale consumerism. The fairy godmother, reimagined as a shrewd, business-savvy manipulator, operates less like a benevolent enchantress and more like a corporate executive orchestrating outcomes behind the scenes. Her musical number stands as one of the film's high points, blending Broadway spectacle with sly commentary on manufactured destiny. She represents institutional pressure, the system that insists stories unfold according to marketable archetypes. The climax crescendos into a meticulously choreographed chaos of misunderstandings, disguises, and reversals. The potion's time limit injects urgency, while cross-cutting between palace intrigue and frantic rescue attempts creates kinetic momentum. Yet even amid this spectacle, the emotional through-line remains focused, Fiona's choice. Her agency anchors the narrative. Rather than passively awaiting rescue, she asserts her identity, reinforcing that love in this universe is reciprocal and grounded in authenticity. Technically, the film reflects a significant leap in computer animation. Character models exhibit more nuanced facial expressions, enabling subtler emotional beats. Action sequences display improved physics and dynamic camera movement, heightening immersion. The expanded color palette contrasts the earthy greens and browns of a swamp with the gleaming golds and pinks of royal fantasy, visually reinforcing the tension between two worlds. The soundtrack, rich with pop anthems and orchestral flourishes, underscores both irony and sincerity in equal measure. The sequel's cultural impact cannot be overstated. It cemented the franchise's place in early 2000s pop culture and demonstrated that animated films could successfully balance meta humor with heartfelt storytelling. It proved that sequels in animation need not be diluted echoes. They could be ambitious, thematically layered continuations. The box office performance reflected this resonance, signaling audience appetite for smart, irreverent family films that respected viewers of all ages. What ultimately distinguishes this chapter is its emotional resolution. The film circles back to its central question: does love require transformation to fit societal expectation, or does it thrive precisely because it defies it? The answer arrives not through spectacle, but through acceptance. The restoration of ogre form is framed not as loss, but as affirmation. Fiona's happiness is not contingent upon royal aesthetics. Shrek's worth is not measured by a mirror. In reaffirming their unconventional identity, the film quietly subverts the fairy tale promise that beauty equals virtue. In retrospect, the sequel feels like a confident middle movement in a larger saga, one that expands character psychology while amplifying humor. It respects the audience's intelligence, trusting that satire and sincerity can coexist. The interplay between parody and pathos becomes its defining strength. Every pop culture jab is balanced by a moment of vulnerability. Every flamboyant musical flourish is anchored in narrative purpose.
More than 2 decades later, the film endures not just as a nostalgic favorite, but as a case study in sequel craftsmanship. It understands escalation not as louder noise, but as deeper emotional stakes. It broadens the setting from swamp to kingdom without losing intimacy. It introduces new characters who enhance rather than overshadow. And most importantly, it retains the core ethos that made the original resonate. The radical notion that happily ever after belongs to those who embrace who they truly are. In the end, the dinner invitation that threatened humiliation becomes a catalyst for growth. The kingdom of far, far away, once a symbol of rigid fairy tale expectation, transforms into a stage for self-definition. And Shrek, the ogre who never aspired to royalty, reclaims his swamp not as retreat, but as chosen sanctuary. The sequel closes not with a surrender to convention, but with a reaffirmation of difference. It reminds us that fairy tales can evolve, that heroes can be unconventional, and that love, messy, loud, imperfect love, remains the most powerful magic of all.